Sarah, we've had a couple of talks about colonisation and colonial, and part of the thing you thought of that I hadn't, but it's so relevant, it hit me like a smack on the face, was that most of the structures you've inherited are Western, top-down, triangular structures with a boss at the top and everyone doing what they're told, a bit of a branching pattern. You're particularly interested in looking at new structures which are more appropriate, faster and more effective. I am thrilled with that. I think they're quite radical.
Yeah, it means a lot because especially we work in indigenous communities. So we try as much as we can start first with what is your traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous wisdom and practices that are already in the place that honors, is the basis of how they design with nature. They're already aligning with the seasons, with their available resources, and also some practices that are cultural in terms of like working with the nature spirits and their rituals, and before planting and harvesting. And even before you cut trees, they have this ritual where they ask the spirits of the trees, like, we're going to cut you, you have to move to another tree. So it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful, beautiful practice. So for me, where I am in this space is that I think while I know that the permaculture movement has been really, very respectful to indigenous cultures, I think a lot of I don't think it's any permaculturist probably thinks otherwise. I think probably there's just a blind spot maybe because it's just predominantly, a lot of the teachers are Caucasians, and the languaging as well is always in the English language. And then I also see like how weird sometimes it feels when I see people of color like me or from Africa or other nations speak about permaculture as if there was no indigenous way of working with their ecosystems beforehand. So, and I think it's changing already anyway because there's a lot of people of color that are indigenous peoples as well, and people of color in other nations that are formerly colonized, who are trying to kind of reclaim the way they work with the land, the language of reading the landscape. And there's an emerging dialogue that I'm trying to shape, and I'd love to hear from all of you as well if you're open to contribute to that. Is that in the formerly colonized global south, at least, are working with indigenous communities, there's also that need to share, like, we have a language for regeneration. We also have a lot of these practices already in place because regeneration is going mainstream, and it's trying to kind of heal from the dominant narrative of restoration and the sustainable development. But it also kind of, because it's going mainstream, there's a tendency to also try to like work from the loudest voice or the loudest measurement tool, or so, and a lot of it is drawn from and inspired by if not from the global south practices, but also from the First Nations, of where the people who are the ones who are in a way holders of the narrative, right now, the dominant narrative at least. So I think it's not a bad thing, actually. I think they acknowledge as well. They do acknowledge lots of these sources, but I think it's an invitation for us to look into narrative sovereignty, like how can the people in the global south tell their own story, or like for us, even for me, I'm a Filipino, but I'm from the city. So if I go to a community, for me to tell their story is another thing, but for them to tell their own stories, and it's much better. And so that's why we're working with this photography and video materials. It's very hard because you have to translate like 3 languages and then to subtitle, and even to share the tools how to do it. but also at the same time, there's this dilemma as well. Like, am I just wanting to do this because to show that it's doable? And so I have going through that as well, reflection. Because there's also there are hurts and anger and grief also from the non-dominant storytellers or narratives or holders of practices that are mostly embodied and oral. So it's not often like we write about it or we publish it. This is called regeneration or this is called permaculture. So a lot of it is just because they do it. You know, it's spoken, it's practiced. So how do you even like capture that? So without trying to capture it as well, because it loses as well the essence that it is. That's the beauty of the narrative as well. So right now, Ro, I've actually almost done writing a proposal for the permaculture movement called Principle Zero. I'll share that with you. It's Principle Zero because Principle One is observe and interact. Right? Yeah, and so but that lens is already coming from you're taking stock of the place that you already have. Like I have a sense of me trying to taking stock of this place. Many cultures will start first with like, who lives in this place? How can I, before I cut this tree, I have to respect. There's that sense that I don't own this place. And that there's a sense that I have to understand my role and relationship with this land or before I even like try to come in. So it can be very formal as like a free, prior, and informed consent, which indigenous communities require before you work with them, or can be as very sacred practice as you all actually undergo a ritual in some tribes so that you can come in and join. But it's not necessarily that, because there might, for modern cultures and practices, right, they don't have to go through it. It's just the idea of reflecting back. What is my relationship to this land? Before I even like just try to take stock of what I can observe and take in and use. So for me, that's maybe because there's been a lot of movements and speaking about decolonizing permaculture, but I think the blind spot as well is like permaculture's principles are founded on how we're going to use the land and the landscapes already, and all the principles are coming from there.
So Sarah, this is interesting because I've come to this myself. I'm rewriting the book, and I'm writing about 12 principles is convenient, but there will be others that will emerge as we learn and adapt and need to adapt to them. And one of the things that had happened, though it isn't a principle, is that when it comes to site analysis, every designer, I've drawn up a series of questions for who owned this land, who were the First Nations, how did they live on this land, is there sacred water, are there sacred trees, was the place in good condition, how can we recognize, not just put up a plaque, but there may be things to do, because often I think in the Philippines, as in Australia, there could have been several landholders with ethnic people constantly occupying their land. That is that observance and respect for cultures. Where we go onto land that's being bought and sold maybe for some centuries even, I think we need a series of protocols about First Nations. And I think this is where you and I are coming to deal with the same problem from slightly different ways. I want to support the fact that there are blind spots in permaculture, because I've had readers of my manuscript and they'll say things that are so Western and bound that I'm a little bit surprised. If you want to do fish aquaculture with fish, then get an old swimming pool. Can you imagine that in Dhaka in Bangladesh? Where would you get an old swimming? I mean, the thing is that people think within their bubble. It's very hard to see what you carry. But I think about process and about having some way in, which you've suggested.
And again, it's that perspective of the first principle begins with, it's a very human oriented, you as a, for your human intention is the first principle. And I think that is like kind of the backbone why a lot of things are messed up in the world now, because we're coming from that are wanting our human needs first. And so that becomes that is a blind spot.
I think that stands alone as quite outstanding. And I think it's got a lot of relevance. And a lot of people are asking that question at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, happy to at some point, maybe by then things are much clearer as well. This is just like terminating. So
well, everyone who's had the wonderful opportunity to listen to this talk, I hope you've been able to see some of the depths and the situations that people are dealing with in permaculture, and they're dealing with them with creativity and positivity, and I think creating new pathways for permaculture. And the people who are doing this are people, and Sarah exemplifies it, people who often have multiple disasters or issues to deal with and still continue to find a creative and compassionate and human world. Sarah, thank you so much for your talk today. That was really, really enlightening, and I hope we can learn so much from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ro. Thank you, Eunice. On behalf of our team, and parents and other people, I mean, there's a lot of us doing this work.
Yeah, there are, and they're lovely. Give them all my love.